Welcome back to the Reading Corner with Mrs. G. For more great stories, subscribe here. Today our story is called Will and Orv. It's about Wilbur and Orville Wright, two brothers who flew in an airplane for the very first time. Have you ever flown in an airplane? Well, let's see what happens as we read Will and Orv. Johnny Moore looked out the window. Gray winter clouds filled the sky. The wind was blowing so hard that the roof shook. "Be no fishing today," his mother said. Johnny groaned to himself. Another slow day of fixing fishnets and doing chores. His mother smiled. "How about bringing some fish to the men at the life-saving station?" she asked. Johnny jumped up. "I'll be back early." He put on his coat. Then he ran along the beach. Big waves crashed upon the shore. Johnny lived on one of the sandy islands off North Carolina called the Outer Banks. The islands could be very dangerous. Every year, bad weather wrecked many of the ships that passed by. The people at the life-saving stations rescued many sailors from sinking ships. Johnny liked to visit the brave men who lived at the station close by the village of Kitty Hawk. But most of all, he liked to watch the Wright brothers, Wilbur and Orville. The brothers lived at the bottom of a big hill near the life-saving station. They flew down the hill on big gliders. For 3 summers, Will and Orv had come to North Carolina from Ohio. They said that the Outer Banks were dangerous for ships, but they were the best place to test their gliders, machines that flew on the wind. The wind blew every day. The sand was soft. There were no trees or rocks to run into. Many people in the nearby villages thought Will and Orv were crazy. Johnny thought they were very smart. Once, Johnny heard people talking about Will and Orv. Johnny told them, "I saw Will fly down the hill just like a bird." One of the women said, "A bird can fly wherever it wants. A bird can fly right off the ground. It doesn't need a hill to jump off." They all laughed, except Johnny. Once, Johnny saw the strangest thing when he visited Will and Orv. The brothers were putting a motor on a big glider. They called this glider a flying machine. They named it Flyer. This year, Will and Orv hadn't gone home at the end of the summer. They stayed so that they could test the Flyer. Will and Orv told Johnny that no one had ever flown into the sky using a motor on a flying machine. Just the thought of flying made Johnny's heart thump. Going down the hill on a glider was exciting, but flying up with the birds was scary. What if the motor stopped? Or one of the wings broke? The wind was still blowing when Johnny reached the life-saving station. He opened the door. "Hello, Johnny," said Mr. Daniels. "I see you've brought us some fish." Johnny sat at the long table. "The other day, Will and Orville tried to fly their machine," Mr. Daniels said. "You mean the one with the motor?" asked Johnny. "Yup," he said, "but it didn't work. The machine made a big bounce and then smacked into the sand. Those propellers were spinning fast. You can't even see them running," said Mr. Daniels. "Propellers?" Johnny asked. "The motor turns 2 big spinning blades. They push the glider up into the sky," said Mr. Daniels. Johnny was amazed. "Will and Orville must be the bravest people in the world," said Johnny. "That's for sure. Other people tried the same thing with a flying machine, but it crashed right into a river," Mr. Daniels said as he shook his head. Just then they heard a yell from the lookout tower. Mr. Westcott called down, "The flag is up! Will and Orv are going to try out their flying machine again." Johnny jumped up from the table. He knew the flag was a signal. It meant that the brothers needed help with one of their machines. 4 of the men left quickly. Johnny ran to keep up. As they reached the first shed, Orv came out. He had on a stiff collar and a tie. The brothers always dressed up. "Hello, boys," Orv said. "Great day for flying." One of the men answered, "The wind is blowing too hard. It's a great day for breaking your neck." "We can't wait any longer," Orv said. "The weather is turning bad. We've already months late in testing the flyer." Johnny thought about the other flying machine that had crashed. He looked up and saw a seagull. It was trying to fly into the wind. If a bird was having a hard time, how could Will and Orv fly? He didn't want his friends to get hurt. Will came out of the shed. "The wind is blowing hard, more than 25 miles an hour, Orv," he said. He looked very worried. Orv looked up at the gray sky. "This is our day, Will. Today is our day to finally fly," said Orv. He opened the big doors on the second shed. Inside, in the dark, sat the flyer. It was much bigger than the gliders. But the flying machine didn't look very strong. The flyer seemed to be made of matchsticks and cloth. Johnny saw the motor on the bottom wing. The 2 propellers were behind the wings. Will climbed onto the flyer. He lay down on his stomach on a flat piece of wood. He was right next to the motor. Will moved around until he was comfortable. Wires leading to the wings were attached to the boards he was lying on. When Will moved the boards from side to side, the wings twisted and changed shape. "This is the secret to flying, Johnny," Will said. "Other people have flown on gliders, but this flying machine can change directions. Whenever I move, the wings twist, just like a bird's." Orv turned to Johnny. "Look at the motor we built," he said. "It's as strong as 8 horses. Johnny was speechless. He didn't believe that the little engine could be as powerful as even 1 horse. Will climbed off the flyer. "We're ready. Let's put the track down," he said. They carried out smooth pieces of wood. Then they placed them end to end to make a track. The flyer had no wheels. It had runners like a sled, so it wouldn't sink in the soft sand. Johnny helped hold the flyer on the track. The wind almost lifted it up. Johnny and the others held on with all their might. Orv climbed onto the machine. He lay down on the wood near the middle of the wing. He turned his hat around so it wouldn't blow off. Then he gave the signal to Will. "Come on, boys," yelled Will. "Let's give a cheer for Orv. No one has ever flown off flat ground using a motor." Will ran to one of the propellers. Then he began to spin it. The motor started with a loud roar. Johnny jumped at the noise. Black smoke shot out of a pipe. The flyer started to shake. It seemed about to fall apart. Johnny looked at the others holding onto the flyer. Everyone looked frightened. Orv turned to Johnny. He smiled and signaled to let go. Johnny let go of the wing. Orv let loose the wire that held the machine to the track. The flyer started to move slowly. Will held one wing and started to walk along with the flyer. Soon he was running. The flyer quickly picked up speed. Will finally let go. "It's up!" The flyer lifted up off the track. It flew right into the wind. The flying machine rose up and then plunged down into the sand. Johnny was scared. Everyone began to run. Orv lay very still on the wing. The motor was running. The propellers continued to spin. "Orv, are you all right?" yelled Will. No answer. Finally, Orv moved. He reached over and turned the motor off. Slowly, he stood up. Orv stepped down onto the ground. He brushed the sand from his face. "I guess we sure flew today, Will. How long was the flight?" Orv said with a big smile. 12 seconds and over 120 feet, shouted Will. The two brothers happily shook hands. Will turned to the helpers and said, "You are the official witnesses to the first powered flight. A flying machine with a person on it took off on its own power and flew under control." Orv looked at Johnny. "What you saw has never been done before. We are the first. We couldn't have done it without help from you and the others. Always remember December 17, 1903. The flyer flew 3 more times that morning. The brothers took turns. Will stayed almost a minute. He traveled near 850 feet. Walking back home that night, Johnny knew Orv was right. He would never forget this day. Seagulls were flying over his head. Johnny knew now that people could fly just like birds. And here's a picture of Orville and Wilbur Wright in 1897. And here's a picture of the flyer. The first flight was recorded on December 17, 1903, as the Wright brothers glider flew 120 feet in 12 seconds with Orville at the controls. Orville and Wilbur Wright had finally done it. A couple more pictures for you. After that first flight, Orville and Wilbur continued to fly. During the third flight, Orville flew 200 feet in 15 seconds. This is what the machine looked like at the end of the last flight. Its rudder frame broke in the landing. And here is an original account of the earliest human flight in all time from the Norfolk, Virginia Pilot newspaper. Another picture of Wilbur and Orville. Here's Orville and Wilbur Wright. The present state of flight would not have been possible without their determination, drive, and perseverance. They were definitely dedicated, and they persevered, and they did it. And now look at us flying all over the place. Well, some people are. Planes can go to different states, different countries. So, check back in the reading corridor for Mrs. G for more great stories. See you next time.